record decisions. Okay, so today's session, I'm going to talk about what is NoSQL and also SQL databases, its differences, benefits, and any drawbacks. Always you have positive aspects of any technology. So here goes with NoSQL as well. So there are advantages as well as disadvantages. And then that is in generally about NoSQL databases. And then we'll focus on MongoDB, right? So that's the plan. Right. So non-SQL, or not only is SQL, or sometimes we call SQL, use these databases came around like in 2000s, especially with the issues of relational databases faced, because they are well structured. You have a schema, which is when your problem changes, or when you want to change the schema, so you have very difficulty in changing it. So with Agile and all, we know nowadays we tend to develop more complex software systems, and so we are not going to stick on a schema per se. So this is one of the reasons why NoSQL databases came into picture. And the second one is the scaling. Like now, after 2000s, the technology developed fast, so that we had processing power, and then we started talking about big data, which is problem for traditional databases, especially when you want to scale, right? When database gets large, how do you handle it? So these cases were then, and then execution time matters most of the time, because for example, if you take some of the markets, execution time matters. So traditional databases may not be able to, get the response time that you need. Third, allow of frequent application changes. When you stick it to a schema, the problem is you have to change everything, because first of all, we fix the schema, and then later on, when you want to change, a schema, then you have to change everything. Right. So, and the final one is we wanted to make this programming simpler for the developers, right? So these are like the reasons why NoSQL databases came into the picture. Then when we talk about the relational databases, and especially with SQL or SQL, structured query language, so they developed in 1970s, and their focus was, reducing data duplication. And we talk about normalization, and then, so those are the, aspects. So for example, you have to focus a lot in the beginning and the designing time, rather than you actually, develop the software. So we can say that when it comes to SQL databases, they have rigid, complex, you have tabular form, and you need, expensive vertical scaling, which means like when you have large number of, fields, so you have to, change them. And then especially when the data gets large, we want to reduce execution time. Right. Now, when you want to compare about SQL and NoSQL, we can first look at the data storage model. And we know already that in SQL databases, what we had these tables. Usually in relational databases, we normally we have related set of tables, which we have fixed set of rows and columns. Why especially we say fixed set of rows and columns, but you will notice that when it comes to NoSQL databases, that limitation is not there. So you can change. It could have very number of, for example, fields. So there are different types of NoSQL databases are there, like for example, document databases, key value databases, wide column databases, graph databases. Each of these has different, use. So in document usually has a JSON format. By the way, like how many of you are already familiar with the JSON format? Can you please raise your hands? Okay, thanks. So you will see that there are different formats we adhere to. And for example, HTML, we have some kind of a structure. Then XML, we have some kind of structure. Similarly, JSON, Java is object notation, which is also another way of represented data, which we are going to see today, right? So JSON format is quite useful for data exchange applications. Now, early days, we had XML. If the time permits, I will also discuss about the XML. But now, XML actually used earlier for data exchange applications, but they later on, JSON dominated, right? Especially with the support of almost all the application. So XML actually replaced by JSON, not JSON documents. The second one we call key value pairs. In Python, for example, we have dictionaries. So dictionary means you always have a key and value pair. Now, for example, let's say you have array. Now, array, we know it's indexed, which means you have a number to refer each of these elements. Now, similarly, in key value pairs, you have some string, which is easy you to the connect with each other. So that is exactly what we see. So some of the NoSQL databases actually use in the form of key value pairs. Then wide column databases where you have tables with rows and dynamic columns. And then graph databases, which is again a popular database, so especially with social media, social networks, because the data is actually connected. Now, for example, if you take Facebook, for example, we have a friends network, and then we are connected with a set of friends. Likewise, you can find, a graph structure. So whenever you want to search some information in application like Facebook, so representing it as a graph will be more natural than representing it as a relational database. So these are some of the reasons why, NoSQL came to the picture. So we were discussing about the data storage model. So if you take the examples, we know traditional databases, we have Oracle, MySQL, SQL Server, PostgreSQL. So these comes under relational databases. We have document databases, MongoDB and CouchDB. So you will see today we are going to start with MongoDB, which is an example for document database. Then for keys and value, Redis and DynamoDB. Wide column, we have Cassandra and HBase. And graph databases, Neo4j and Amazon Neptune. So these are some of the examples. So hopefully I will try to cover some concepts of graph as well, which is quite popular nowadays. So the plan is, I believe, covering some examples with Neo4j. So the primary purpose, if you take SQL databases, it's general purpose. You see, like most of the application we developed early days, like 10, 20 years back, we based on relational databases. But when it comes to different types of NoSQL databases, their implementations or the usage were different. Of course, document databases are general purpose, like MongoDB could be used for any of the applications. Key value for large amount of data with simple lookup queries. For example, now we will see that in relational databases, we have a lot of joins, like the data is normalized no duplication, but then, to query, we have to make joins. Like simply, when it comes to key value stores, if you want to have very simple queries, then you may use it as a key value pairs, right? Then white column, especially when you have large amounts of data with predictable query patterns. And a graph I already discussed, which is used to when you want to analyze traversing relationship between connected data. Social media network is one of the examples. Right. Now, schemas, that means in relational databases, we have schema. So that means we have a table structure, we have a fixed set of number of, fields, and then we have some data types. It's very rigid, right? Isn't it? And then you have all these primary keys and foreign keys, which, makes the relationships. But in NoSQL database is very flexible, which means sometimes you don't have to have a fixed set of, columns as we needed in, SQL databases. So you can say that the schemas are flexible, especially if your application is, changing in nature or your requirements are changing, then maybe you need to switch for NoSQL database. Joins, of course, in SQL databases, we have to believe in joins. We can say required, but NoSQL, of course, I actually share some document with you to comparison of SQL with MongoDB. So it's possible, but typically we would say it is not required, right? So we normally say we don't, require to have, set of, joins. Right. The next one, the data to object mapping. So requires object relational mapping for when you are going to have objects. But NoSQL databases, most of the cases, you don't need object relational mapping, right? So what happens is in MongoDB, we can directly map the data structures in most of the programming languages. And you will see that MongoDB actually supports a lot of already available programming languages. So let's summarize what are the benefits and drawbacks of use of NoSQL databases, because it's very important that you not blindly select a particular database for your applications. So that is the first thing. Now, for example, nowadays I see, especially when you ask to develop a application, sometimes you don't need a database. And most of the time, NoSQL databases, they are like scripts, right? So sometimes it's easy to handle, right? So likewise, depend on your requirement, you have to decide. First of all, the question is whether you need a databases. If so, okay, whether you need a SQL database or NoSQL database and so on, right? So that affects, development time, and also like when you're progressing. Otherwise, you have to face a lot of, issues. Right now, if you focus on the benefits, as we can see, NoSQL databases, we already talk about that it's flexible, and you can scale horizontally, can have fast queries, and easy for the developers to work with. So these are like, advantages. Now, these advantages come back with some drawbacks as well. Now, data consistency is a problem, right? Now, for example, let's say the change of some data item. Since we don't have any data duplication, let's say we are going to change of a particular person's address, let's say, as a toy example. Now you have to change it to one single place in the relational databases, but that might be a multiple places in a NoSQL databases, which if you missed one is, so then there could be some consistency problem. So that is one of the issues. You have to be very careful about this, right? And then Data models in NoSQL data are typically optimized for queries and not for reducing data duplication. So that is also another thing that we need to get it as a drawback. So, I mean, so therefore, sometimes we have to validate. I will discuss this validation. So when you're storing the data in, let's say, MongoDB, maybe you have to validate. We have to check whether the required columns are there, the values, and so on, right? I'll come to that part later on in a separate session. Lack of security is also another issue. Scalability and also lack of standardization, because people can come up with in various ways, which might not a formal way of putting. Like, for example, if you take SQL, so we have a standard way of writing. So sometimes this might not be the case for NoSQL databases. Right, now that we have discussed about the general idea about the NoSQL databases, now let's focus on MongoDB, right? So I'm going to assume that everybody is now installed MongoDB. Usually, this will support two ways. They have their MongoDB Atlas, where you can directly access in the cloud, which I'm not going to discuss now. Maybe later on we'll discuss once you get familiar with. But I need this to have your own MongoDB instance, right? So that's why I said, okay, we'll install community edition of MongoDB. Right, so what is MongoDB then? So MongoDB is a document-oriented NoSQL database. Especially, we use it for high volume data storage. So when you have a very large number of collection of data, so MongoDB is could be used. So what it allows is, it allows you to change the structure of the record. So we can call documents, you can add new fields or delete existing ones. And it's open source, right? So it can use JSON-like documents, which is, you can vary the structure. Structure is not fixed, it's flexible. Right. So why we have to use MongoDB then? So it's very flexible and adaptable to real business world situations. We know that the businesses are consistently changing. The requirements are changing. We live in a time where everything is changes, right? Which means the database, the technology is changing. So which means, so MongoDB is more useful than sometimes the traditional relational databases. Right. And then queries can be made to return certain fields within the documents. So that is another possibility. It supports field, range-based queries, regular expressions. So that could be used for searching data from the stored data. Then very easy DBMS. You can scale up or down. So depending on your requirement, you can think of having a very large database, so you can actually have a very small, you can scale down. So helps you to use as internal memory for storing the work in temporary databases, for which it's much faster. So sometimes you need to use temporary databases or temporary instances. For example, sometimes we can do the same with MySQL as well. We can temporary memory-based databases we could create, which is sometimes when you work with the queries. And then now to improve the query execution, we can also define indexes. So MongoDB supports both primary and secondary indexes, which means depending on our query, we can select some of the fields as index fields, which improves the execution speed. Right, next one. We know that nowadays the databases are more distributed nature. So that means we don't have a centralized database. So databases are distributed in a fashion. Like, for example, if you take even search engine like Google. So when you request some information, the information coming from multiple databases. So when you want to get the data like this, you have to data is distributed with some replication. The idea is, if let's say a particular database fails or particular node fails, you don't have to really worry about the data you stored at that node, because that is replicated in other places. So which means you are not going to lose, and there'll be no downtime as well. We know what will happen in a centralized database. If something goes wrong, you are going to lose. At the same time, there will be a long downtime, right? So which will not happen in distributed fashion because it supports a replication. Right, and then basically it uses JavaScript object in place of procedures and supports special collection type TTL, time to live, for data storage, which will expire at a certain time. So these are why you may use. And then file storage system is known as GridFS, and it offers various methods to perform aggregation operations. Or else we can have aggregation pipeline, which means you can have several data processing you can put together. And then you can have MapReduce, which is again ways of improving the efficiency of execution. Or you can have single objective aggregation commands. Right. And then you can also store any type of file, which can be any size without affecting the stack, because normally you will have a fixed size without problem. You can have you can create any file size. So the dynamic database schema we use is the JSON. We will look at it, and you can use indexes to improve the performance. And then any field, you can use it as an index, right? So you can also have replication, which I think we have seen earlier as well. And MongoDB can run over multiple servers. So it's not, limited to one particular server. I told you, like the distributed server. So especially in distributed databases, we talk about something called balancing the load. So balancing the load means, like, sometimes when you want to process some query, so it might process only in one server. That means one single server is loaded, but others are idle, we call it. So what you could do is, when we have multiple queries, you can actually distribute and balance in a balanced way, so that all the servers are executed, or so that the load is balanced. Sorry about that. I got a cough. Sorry. And then when you have duplicate data with the replication, as I told you earlier, it can keep the system up and running, especially when there's a failure of service. So where you can actually use MongoDB when you compare to relational databases, okay, especially big data applications. Unstable schema, which means if you want to frequent changes of the schema, and especially distributed data. So that means we are going to have a large number of users, and sometimes if your application supporting application support different users from different continents, for example, that the data can keep in different continents, right? So in a distributed fashion. Okay, the features. Sorry, the document structure of MongoDB, we will put it in according to how the developers construct their classes and objects, so that we can actually incorporate easily with the MongoDB. And the rows, you don't have to have a schema. So you can actually have a schema list. You will see that you can have key value pairs, which is in a JSON format, and that can be changed. So, and the other point is MongoDB can also represent hierarchical relationship, right? So to store arrays and then more complex data structures. So it will be easier in MongoDB. Right. And then each database contains the connections, which in turn contains the documents. And each document can be different with varying number of fields. The size and the content of each document can be different from each other. So which is the normally the naturally how you handle the MongoDB. So if you come up to now implementation details, so how data is stored in MongoDB, we call each record as documents. We know that in MySQL, usually we call it as rows. So the row in a relation database, it could be known as a document in MongoDB. Right? So the MongoDB database, you can say that it's a container for all the collections. So the document, you will have a set of fields. It's like a tuple, but you have there's no fixed number of fields. So the same set of fields is not needed. So it could be changed, right? So you will have the documents, the collections, and then you will have containers. Right, now in MongoDB, when you take documents, the documents belong to particular class or a group. And this is known as collection. So in simple terms, we can say collection is a bunch of MongoDB documents. So what you can do is you can create set of users, and that set can consider as a collection. Whereas if you compare this with MySQL, you will have a table which used to store rows of similar type. Then let's look at the terminology differences. So for example, if you take MySQL with MongoDB, in relation databases like MySQL, we use the term table, where in MongoDB, we use the term collection. And we talk about rows, which is the document in MongoDB. The column is normally known as fields. Of course, although I told you like the MongoDB, we are focused on the joins, but sometimes you might need to have joins. So MySQL, we talk about these as joins. That means, combine multiple, rows. But combining multiple, collection of documents, we can call it as embedded documents, or you may also call it as linking. Right, now let's look at briefly how we may store data, right? So in, when you look at MySQL databases, so in MySQL database, we have set of columns. Now, let's say this is about some student, right? Name Sam, age is 45, and then you have some contact details, and then you have some address. So simply this is a MySQL where you have a fixed set of columns here, right? So in MongoDB, we can store the same data in like JSON documents, right? So let's see how the JSON format look like, right? Now, the start of the JSON form, usually you will have curly brackets. And then we will have, for example, key value pairs. We have name. And then the value is Sam. And the age, you see it's a 45. Remember that the 45 is taken as a number. There's no double quotes. Then the contact, you have another curly bracket, which means you might have sometimes multiple values. for contact. In this particular case, we have a mobile, and it's not a number. You take it as a string value. And then finally, you have a home address. We have Peradeniya Road, Kandy. So this could be a very simple, MongoDB, the data representation. So the document mean the row of MongoDB looks like this, right? So if you look at when you work on MongoDB, there could be a multiple language supports. So almost all popular languages are supported by MongoDB. So you can have driver supports for all these commonly used languages. Nowadays, we know that the Python, Java, C, C++, C#, they are quite popular. Even the newer versions, languages like Go and Erlang, so those languages are also supported with MongoDB, right? Right, the installation instruction I have actually shared. So you can go to downloads, and depending on operating system, you will download. And I hope you have already done this. And that is for simply how to use them. Right, next, let's look at some simple commands. We will talk about the syntax first, and then we will, talk about how how it relates to, for example, SQL. Sorry about that. Right, now, logging into the system, remember we use, even in MySQL, once you start the server and we have access MySQL -u and whatever the username and -p, we log on to that. And then similarly, in MongoDB, we will have the same kind of command. We could use Mongo with -u representing the user, which you can give your username. And then we can have the password and the whatever the database that you want to access it, right? So this is the simply how you may start, right? So remember that we have download some Mongo shell. We can use it to access in the same way, right? Then similar to the command that we have discussed in SQL, we once you enter, you can see what are the databases inside the database. So in MySQL, we type show databases, and then in MongoDB, there's slight difference. We can say, okay, show DPS. So remember that if you start with the user admin, then you can see all the databases. Otherwise, if you log in as a regular user, you might see only the databases that you have created. Right. Then, similar to MySQL, to start working with the particular databases, you have used the same command, same way. We have say use database name. You can type the database name, and then you can start using it, right? Right. And then if you want to different databases, and then you have to use DB name. And then sometimes you have to use provide username and password, right? So whenever you type use and database name command, if it's need the authentication, So you can use DB authentication and you can provide the username and password. So finally, if you want to log in out, we can simply use DB logout. Right. Now, if you want to get, in the databases, let's say you have already collected a set of, collections, and then inside the database, you can see the collection using show collections, and then you can get the collection names using db.get collection names. Similarly, all the users, because you can actually assign users for a database. So similarly, you can actually use see users using show users and then db.get users. Similarly, there are roles, which means like in previous one, where the users are able to just query data or maybe with the edit access. So you can define different roles so that you can see it here as well. Okay, so let's see how you create a collection right now. For example, I told you collection is a set of documents. The document is a row, right? So let's say we want to create a collection called users. Let's say we want to list who are the users for a particular database. So we can say DB create collection, and within the bracket you can type whatever the name which you are going to create. So for example, if you're going to create a set of users, maybe you can type it as users. Right. And then if you want to insert a document, like the insert in data. So remember in MySQL, we use insert into. Likewise, here we will use db dot whatever the collection name. So let's say in previous one, if we have created the collection name users, so we have to use db users dot insert, and then you can define whatever the values, right? And I told you, like, you can have any number of fields, so it doesn't have a fixed set of fields. So you can actually not a fixed set of fields are there. Then when we have insert, there are different commands we can actually use. One is you can just say insert, which indicates that you are going to insert one document, or you can use insert many. Sometimes we will use insert one as well to indicate that you are going to include one document. So so you can see how it is installed. So when you insert multiple values, so we can have many values in this particular case. When you want to save it, you can use save command. Either you can use to update the existing document, or you can have a new one, depending on how you use the parameters. So especially, I didn't discuss this earlier. So any collection, any document that you have installed, usually you have an ID. So if ID matches with the existing document, then what happens normally, it documents updated. Now, usually this ID is automatically generated. Of course, you can create it, but usually if you do not provide it, it will do it for us, which we can later actually use that ID. But for the time being, let's remember that if you use ID and then it will matches with the existing one, what happens is it will update it. So if it does not match with what is existing, then it will create a new one, right? Right. So as a summary, what you need to remember is matching documents will be updated and no documents matching with the ID you provided, and then document is inserted, right? So for example, here we will use same method, and then this is the ID, and here is the value we provide, and it will check with the existing, whether this is existing value. In that particular case, if it is existing, then it will update. Right, now let's look at how to retrieve. We know that in MySQL, for example, we will use usually select all from, and then where, if you have, connections. So for example, if you want to find everybody in a connection, now let's say we talk about users, right? So let's say we want to find out all the users. In SQL, usually we type select all from users, isn't it? So if it is come to MongoDB, so we will use db dot whatever the collection name, let's say users, and then we say dot find. So when you say dot find, right? So that means it will retrieve all the record. It's simply like use of, asterisk. It will select all the documents. In this particular case, we call documents from the database. Then we know that this is not a good way of accessing data, especially in large databases. Remember, big databases, if you do this, it consumes a lot of, your processing power, and you should not do that. So let's say in databases, we use limit, and we use say, okay, how many records you want to execute. The same way in MongoDB, we can use the limit one. We can, let's say, if you want to get only the 10 documents, we can use DB and whatever the collection name, find, and with the limit, you can decide how many records you want to access it. Right. And then the next one, let's say you want to access a particular object or particular document, let's say. So if you want to retrieve particular document by the ID attribute, which I told you, like this is automatically generated. If you can even provide it, but usually we will generally create automatically, which you can use to access a particular document. So the syntax is DB, we have the collection name, find, we have attribute value pair, the attribute is the ID, and then the value is object ID, and you provide some value there. Sorry. When you want to retrieve specific collection attributes by passing object having attribute names assigned to 1 or 0, based on whether that attribute value needed to be included in the output or not, respectively. Right? So the idea is here is what records that you want to use it. So this is the special case that you can say. So the value that you use you can use binary, that means 1 and 0. If it is 1, so it will record everything. So for example, if you look at the first one, what it means, you are going to get a document with the object, with the ID of some ID, and you are going to get the two fields, field 1 and field 2. And then when you say find, and if you say field 1, 0, which is, we are going to remove the field 1. Right. So that's to display the collection of records. Right. Now we know that one of the commonly used queries get in the count. So we know in SQL we use select count, within brackets we have asterisk, let's say from users. So this will give you how many records you have in a relational database. Now, similarly, in MongoDB, we can simply say DB in the collection name, let's say users, and simply you use count. We'll give you number of users or number of documents in users, right? I mean, similarly, you can, for example, let's say if you compare the link that I have shared with you, which compares the SQL with the MongoDB, even you can count, for example, let's say users where their age is, let's say, greater than 30. Let's say we want to retrieve the number of users whose age is greater than 30. So simply you can have a count. So we can have DB dot whatever the collection name, let's say users dot. We can find within the curly brackets, we can specify age as greater than 30. Again, remember this is, we will just not find as greater than, but as a attribute value pair, and then we can use count. I think I will explain this with an example, but for the time being, what I want to highlight is, so all the command that we have discussed, the aggregation is also supported in MongoDB as well. Only thing is we need to learn how you may use this syntax. Okay. Okay, now let's move on to some administrative commands. Now, depend on the user role, you want some users only to use the dataset. Some users want to read the data and also to change the data. Some actually we will use for as administrative users, which they are the ones who decide who's going to access and what. So when it comes to some administrative command, it's always nice to know the statistics. For example, what is the storage size of the collection, right? So you can look at the storage size, the total size, the overall statistics. So that you can use simple command like DB, whatever the collection name, you can say stats, or you can say DB print collection stats. And then the second very important one is how long it will take. We know that in Python, for example, we will use time it. So that means when you are executing some Python statement, we would like to know how long it will take to execute. So similarly, if you have read write operations, and then if you want to get some average time taken for read and write, then you can use DB, whatever the collection name, you can say latency stats, which will give you the average time it takes for read and writes, which is very useful. Right, so this will so depend on your requirement, you can actually get that information. Then other administrative commands, the collection size for data and indexes, the size of the collection we can use using data size, the total size of the document stored in the collection, storage size, the total size is byte for both collection data and indexes. Usually it means the indexes are saved separately. Total size of all indexes in the collection. So remember that the size of the index is also important. So sometimes finding appropriate number of index is very challenging, right? Sometimes you might think, okay, I will use index for all the fields. No, it's not going to work. It will worsen the situation, right? Okay, so that's about the theory part of this. Just to summarize about what we have discussed so far, we discussed the difference between the NoSQL and SQL databases. the difference between the SQL and NoSQL, benefits and drawbacks, and then we simply look at basics of MongoDB. So now I think it's time for us to start, create some documents and then put these simple commands in practice. So as a homework or the group work, what I want you to do is for the same application that you have used for the relational database earlier, I need the MongoDB version of it, just to get a hands-on experience of the differences of SQL script and also the MongoDB script. Right. Okay, let's start then. Now to do that, we want to start MongoDB. Let me start. Let me stop sharing and also stop recording just to set up my environment. Right. Let's pause. Right. Right now, we are now successfully connected. So now we can try. Okay, Imran, no issue. Yes. So maybe you can try later on. So the command, as I told you earlier, one thing you have to notice is connecting the local deployment. So what I did is I have locally installed. So to connect that one, I have used Mongo shell sh, the command. Or sometimes you can also use with the port number, that means Mongo sh within double quotes, MongoDB : //localhost : and then the default port is 27,017. So these are the ways to connect. So now once we have this, sorry. Now we have connected. And for example, if you want to connect with some username and password, so for example, you can have username and then you can use __ username, and also you can have the database details, authentication database, which we have seen we can use, and then it will prompt the password. So the other thing I have showed you earlier is you can use both the username and password within this so that it will not prompt the password, right? So that's what we have discussed so far. Now we are ready. So now we can try some commands, right? So running commands, as I told you, I hope you remember we said once you connect, you can use a DB. So that means DB, which will show you we are right now in test database. But if you look at the commands that we have discussed, sorry, I opened too much. So looking for my right. Let me check. So we want to see we logged in. Earlier we used Mongo. but slight changes we have used Mongo shell. But the same commands could be used when you want to specify user password at particular database, right? If you want to see all the databases, you can check databases. So you can say show DBS, you can check. So this is not the one. So you can see we have admin, the databases, and then we can select a particular database using this. Right, now let's create a new database. So the command is we can use, and then you can type some a name for that, right? So for example, we can say use employee, right? And then we will create a new employee, and then we can add the data. So we discuss two ways of creating, and then we can say well, the database is employee, so we can now create some collection. So let's say I'm going to create a DB, let's say user. So that is my collection, and then I will say, okay, insert. And within that, you can specify the fields and the records. Simply, I will just have one, let's say X1, which will create, right? So, okay, so the next one I will change this. The insert is depreciated. We can deprecate it. We can use insert one. So let me use another one, db.user.insert one. So let's say X, we will say 2. So now we can have automatically, you will say we have IDs as well, right? So we can have many values as well. Now let's say we create a database. Now the command is, what we use is use and then type the name. So in this particular case, we said use employee. And within that, we create a collection. So we say directly, actually we add, but we could have written create collection as well. For example, instead of directly adding, we could create separate collection. Let's say we have departments. So one way to do this is we can say, okay, we have DB dot, we are inside now employee database. So let's create a new collection. So create collection. Let's say this say department. Right. We'll create a new a collection called department. Now inserting, as I told you earlier, now let's add some department. We'll put up some values. So the command is, we can say DB, and then this time I'm going to select department, right? Then I will say insert one. right? One report, and then you can specify key value pairs. So for example, I can say, okay, department, let's see, department number. Let me say this is 1, right? And then let's say department name. I will say research. And then let's say manager. Let's say someone, and so on. You can have values like this, and then we can close the bracket. So this is one way to add. So we have added the objects. So we have include 1. You can have many as well. Let's add 2 more departments. So the command is this time db dot create. Sorry, not create. It's a department. Dot, we'll say insert many. So I will go one at a time. So I will go down, I will press enter, which, I'm going to enter part by part. So let's have a department number. So this time, let me say department number is 2. Department name. We have finance. Right, let's say manager. Let's say, right. So the last one, you don't need a comma. So this will enter one record. So let's add another record. So let's start with a curly bracket again. So let's say department number. So this time I will put 3, department name. Sorry, colon, I will put HR. Let's say manager. Salary. Let's say 100,000. Okay, and then we put up, let's say 2, and finally we can have, okay. I think I missed, yeah, I actually missed square bracket. To close it only, I need it. So this should, let me take an error, right. So I'm going to go from here. So I'm going to edit. What I missed is I have to have a square bracket. Right, okay, sorry. So I put a square bracket here, open square bracket. And then we have like this. Then close square bracket and then normal bracket. Yes, we did it. Right, now we have added everything. Now let's find, everything from department. So we can say db department dot find. So which should shows you this, right? So we have added 3 documents for the department, and for each one you will see a unique ID, object ID is created, which you can use this to update if you want. Okay. Okay, if you have finished up to this point, please let me know. I will come up here, because those who missed, maybe you can try. And remember, I have changed number of fields in the second when I insert many. So when I put department number, name, manager, I put additionally salary. Now let's say that we want to get the department. So the DB department. We want to find out now here, when you put it like this, we want to find everyone, right? All the details. But let's say we need like only the research department. So we know within the curly brackets, we can say, okay, department name should be, yes, research. We are getting this. Right now, we can use another way to select. Okay, I don't know. Select and project, these are like two mathematical concepts that we will normally discuss when you talk about the relational databases. And remember, we talk about like how depend on the binary value. I'll go back to the slide again. So I will show you like what exactly I'm referring to. Like, for example, now inserting we did. Now find, okay, this one. Now, when you talk about, finding something, and the first one is, your where clause, the selection. The second one is actually the selection of your columns, right? Sometimes we say this project operation. If you remember mathematical basis for relational databases, usually we discuss this. So the first one is the selection and then the projection. So the selection, now I can go back to my discuss this. So the first one is I can say, okay, db.department, right? I can say find, right? And then first one is what do you need to find? If you just say that's okay. Okay, sorry about that. So when we say DB department find, and then we want to this first curly bracket will indicate your selection condition. So let's say we don't have any condition, which means we are going to get everything. And that's the first thing. Then the second one, we can specify what you need to keep. Now, for example, now we have in this particular case, we have maximum of four fields. So we can have department number. So let's say we are going to have department 1, right? And then we can say, let's say department name, right? So which indicates when you put 1, what it means, right? We are going to say that, okay, we need the department number and department name. So now you see all the three all the three documents, we have only department number and department name. Okay. So similarly, you can use 0 as well. Now let me say, Now, instead of putting this, we know that salary is with only one. So let me ask to disregard that record, salary. So let me put 0. So now when you put 0, that means you say, okay, ignore this. You see the third document, we had a salary that had actually discarded. So make a note of this. This is another way that use that, right? So this is also called projection, and projection is very useful sometimes, depend on cases where you want to list it. Instead of just typing what you want to include, you can use this binary flag to say which one to include and so on. So for example, you see this ID column when you view, usually we don't need it, right? So let's say we are interested only on data. So let's say, okay, it's a question. So can you type in the chat, okay, I want to exclude ID, right? What will be the command for this one? Can you type in the chat? This, by the way, if you do not understand anything, I mean, just let me know. It's perfectly all right. We can go from the beginning. So the next one is I'm going to discuss a little bit on how to update. Right. There are a couple of ways you can update directly referring to the object. And that is what we see in our document. So let me go back. So for example, when you want to make an update, sorry. You can use a couple of commands. You can use insert, you can use update, or you can use save. And what we discuss, and then let's say if you use update, update usually again like in insert, you can update one document or you can update many documents, right? So sorry about that. So let me see changing one. So this is called update one. So let me demonstrate that. So let me see. Here is what I have. So first of all, let's first look at our department. So now we are, I hope you are very familiar with this. We say department dot find everything. So here is the list. So for example, let's say we want to find particular record. We can say, okay, we say dp.department. Let's say find. We use curly bracket and then we will type field and a value. So let's say department name. I'm going to use department name HR. So now what will happen? We actually get the department HR, right? So now, if you want to change something, we can use different ways. Let's say we want to change the salary part, right? So let's say we will have salary, and then we will say, for example, we will make it no, change this, right? So let's say we have the department name, we got HR, and then you can change it. So the way to change it is, there are a couple of methods. One way is you can use different operators. Now, one method we can use is set operator, where we are going to set, right? Now let's see, when we use different, values, we can use them to change it, right? So in previous one, then we can specify particular object ID, and then we can define what values you want to change, right? So let's say we are going to change the HR department, let's say salary. So one way to is you have to specify the value, and if the ID matches, one way is you can actually use it to change, right? Now in this particular case, now we can say db.department, right? And then we can say department.update, update one. And then we can say okay underscore ID. So we can have a colon. So we have object ID. Let me check whether this is working. Sorry. Let me copy paste. Otherwise, you have to type this. Right. So we have done this, comma, and then we'll say okay, that is similar. So then we will say depart number, that is 3, department name, HR, manager, let's say co-author, and then salary. Let's say there's an increase 200,000. Right, that's the end, and we'll update it. Okay.
So I think the O is
Should be capital.
uppercase.
Yes, yes, next. Should be capital. Okay. So let me change that to one operator, and let's see. So we have update one, we have update. Okay, let me put only this. Okay, what I missed here. Department update one. So yeah, something I made a mistake when I actually updated. Let me check. So the point that I want to make it is, we are going to change it. check. Okay, first one. Okay, yeah. So let me check again. So this is what I did. First one is the selection condition. So I think I have to separately these two. That means first one, I'm referring the field that is ID. Don't type it, just check. Well, we discussed the basics of MongoDB and we compare what are the differences with the relational database and MongoDB. And we basically work with simple application where we learn how to insert and also query and simply edit data. So I will continue from here, hopefully on Sunday. Right. Thanks, everyone. And we'll finish for today.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.